I'm JP.
And I'm Peter.
We are Pinedo Brothers filmmakers, Catholic artists that are working to revitalize the world of Catholic art through our storytelling. We tell stories about faith, not really the faith-based type of films, but stories about faith. So if you're really tired of the typical Hollywood fare that people are constantly pumping out that may or may not have an agenda, that may or may not be trying to hate you and destroy everything that you
stand
value.
for and love and live for.
Yeah. If you're tired of that, but then you also don't really want to have what your typical faith-based fare is, kind of a little bit on the there's many people that love it, but it's very on the maybe preachy side, overbearing or something like that. We're trying to find something right in the middle, and our viewers can tell us how we're doing on that. But anyway, today we're talking about Lepanto.
It's a pretty awesome battle.
Peter with the whiskey.
Yep.
I'm gonna join him right here.
Catch up.
Yep. Peter, tell us a little bit about Lepanto.
So Lepanto, the Battle of Lepanto, 1571. So this is a little bit after the end of the basic, the big crusading era. Europe has already started to become very divided. There's the Protestant Reformation, and the European world is crumbling, crackling, and Christendom is reaching its twilight.
Or so they thought.
Yes. The Ottoman Empire is growing more and more powerful, and I think the kind of mindset at the time is that the Ottoman Empire is basically going to take over and become the next Roman Empire. And so what the Battle of Lepanto was when the Catholic countries of Europe formed what they called the Catholic League. I think it was the Catholic League, something like that. And they were led by Don Juan of Austria, a prince of the Holy Roman Empire, and he leads the Catholic League into battle against the navy of the Ottoman Empire, and they win this very significant battle for Christendom. And it wasn't the end of the war with the Ottoman Empire. They didn't decimate the Ottoman Empire. They're still around. They were still a threat. But I think the real significance of this battle was the mindset that it gave the people of Europe and the people of Christendom, that they weren't reaching their end, that they still had hope, they still had strength. And it was kind of a bolstering of their confidence and their self-image, like we can come together still and defend ourselves. So it was a very significant battle, at least if nothing else, in that way, and that it showed the people that they can fight back. They can defeat this great giant empire that seems to be taking over all things and sweeping into their way of life.
And that's a perfect segue for us, because I had this thought, Pete, and I was thinking, it seems like every aspect of our life is being invaded now. Where I work a job where I'm very glad to have the job, but I'm a little bit afraid from time to time that I might be forced to say something as a Christian that I will not be able, that a Christian in good conscience cannot say. And the fact that we're here in America and we think that we might be that's a very real thing. I've had to push back a few times, and I don't think I'm alone in this. I think there's many people. Peter, your day job is completely different, but I don't think I'm alone in the fact that I am worried that I might be asked to say something that I can't say in good conscience as a Christian. So what I'm seeing now is this vision of an enemy that's creeping into every aspect of our society, from politics to entertainment to where we work. You see it and you don't know how to fight back. It's like, what can we do? How can we be a part of a resistance here? And to that end, I wanted to speak about our cultural heritage as the part of the West. where we can see where we came from and perhaps gather strength from it, but also know that that is part of our story, that is an impelling and compelling story that will beat this dark force. That we have what it takes to defeat this dark force. Our story is better than theirs, but if we don't know what it is, then we can't tell it, and then we'll lose. So I wanted to start a new, and we don't have to do it every podcast, obviously, but a sort of ongoing discussion between you and I, where we talk about great moments in our Western in our Western past, our Western cultural history, and how that influences our story that we can tell, and influences the story of everyone that is a part of this history, the history of the West. Chances are, if you're listening to this, you are a part of the story. There might be some folks listening in Asia, and that's a different story. I'm not trying to weed out everyone, I'm not trying to weed out anyone, but the powers that formed this country were powers that were formed by the Catholic faith, or the Christian faith. If you're looking at Spain and Mexico, then that's the Catholic faith. If you're looking at the United States and Canada, with England, then that's the Christian faith. They were formed with that understanding. So we are a part of a story that is formed underneath that understanding. And the story of Lepanto is a perfect example of it. And I'm so glad that you brought up that historical perspective of it. And I want to go into it a little bit more here in a little bit. But before we go into the historical perspective whole hog, now that we have a broad strokes overview, I wanted to read a book or a poem from one of my favorite authors, Mr. G.K. Chesterton.
Oh, Chesterton.
He wrote a poem dedicated to this Battle of Lepanto, and it's a masterpiece. From an artistic perspective, it is brilliant. And maybe we can analyze the poem from an artistic perspective and then talk more about how that would influence possible stories of our own.
Okay.
Because this is a great story, guys. Lepanto is one of those little-known stories that, it's just dying to be made into a film. And you guys might not... We're getting a visitor here on our set.
He'll jump on me every once in a while and freak me out.
Mios the cat. He's decided to crash this party. He's our Maine Coon kitten, 6 months old, just as old as our baby. And you folks have probably already seen him wandering around the background a couple times. I've never informally introduced him. He's going to pop up, probably not on my lap. He'll probably pop up more on the counter in the back. In any case, Pete, shall we go for it?
Let's go for it.
Okay. Lepanto by G.K. Chesterton. White founts falling in the courts of the sun, and the Sultan of Byzantium is smiling as they run. There is laughter like the fountains in that face of all men feared. It stirs the forest darkness, the darkness of his beard. It curls the blood-red crescent, the crescent of his lips, for the inmost sea of all the earth is shaken with his ships. They have dared the white republics up the capes of Italy. They have dashed the Adriatic round the lion of the sea. And the Pope has cast his arms abroad for agony and loss, and called the kings of Christendom for swords about the cross. The cold Queen of England is looking in the glass. The shadow of the Valois is yawning at the mass. From evening isles fantastical rings faint the Spanish gun, and Lord upon the golden horn is laughing in the sun. Dim drums throbbing in the hills half heard, where only on a nameless throne a crownless prince has stirred, where risen from a doubtful seat and half a tainted stall, the last knight of Europe takes weapons from the wall. The last and lingering troubadour to whom the bird has sung, that once went singing southward, and when all the world was young. In that enormous silence, tiny and unafraid, comes up along a winding road the noise of the crusade. Strong gongs groaning as the guns boom far, Don John of Austria is going to the war. Stiff flags straining in the night blast cold, in the gloom black purple, in the glint old gold. torchlight crimson on the copper kettle drums, then the tuckets, then the trumpets, then the cannon, and he comes. Don John laughing in the braid beard curled, spurning of his stirrups like the thrones of all the world. Holding his head up for a flag of all the free, love light of Spain, hurrah, death light of Africa, Don John of Austria is riding to the sea. Mahound in his paradise above the evening star, Don John of Austria is going to the war. He moves up a mighty turban on the timeless houri's knees, his turban that is woven of the sunset and the seas. He shakes the peacock gardens as he rises from his ease, and he strides among the treetops and is taller than the trees. And his voice through all the garden is a thunder sent to bring black Azrael and Ariel and Ammon on the wing. Giants and the genie, multiplex of wing and eye, whose strong obedience broke the sky when Solomon was king. They rush in red and purple from the red clouds of the morn, from temples where the yellow gods shut up their eyes in scorn. They rise in green robes roaring from the hell green of the sea, where the fallen skies and evil hues and eyeless creatures be. On them of the sea valves cluster and the gray sea forest curl, splashed with a splendid sickness, the sickness of the pearl. They swell in sapphire smoke out of the blue cracks of the ground. They gather and they wonder and give worship to Mahound. And he said, break up the mountains where the hermit folk may hide, and sift the red and silver sands lest bone of saint abide, and chase the gowers flying night and day, not giving rest, for that which was our trouble comes again out of the west. We have set the seal Solomon on all things under sun, of knowledge and of sorrow and endurance of things done. But a noise is in the mountains, and I know the voice that shook our palaces 400 years ago. Is it he that said not Kismet? Is it he that knows not fate? It is Richard, it is Raymond, it is Godfrey at the gate. It is he whose loss is laughter when he counts the wager worth. Put down your feet upon him, that are peace beyond the earth. For he heard drums groaning and heard guns jar. Don John of Austria is going to the war. Sudden and still, hurrah, bolt from Iberia, Don John of Austria is gone to Alcazar. St. Michael's on his mountain in the sea roads of the north, Don John of Austria is girt and going forth. Where the gray seas glitter and the sharp tides shift, and the sea folk labor and the red sails lift, he shakes his lance of iron and he claps his wings of stone. The noise is gone through Normandy, the noise is gone alone. The north is full of tangled things and text and aching eyes, and dead is all the innocence of anger and surprise. And Christian killeth Christian in a narrow dusty room, and Christian dreadeth Christ that hath a newer face of doom. And Christian hateth Mary that God kissed in Galilee, but Don John of Austria is riding to the sea. Don John calling through the blast and eclipse, crying with the trumpet of his lips. Trumpet that saith, Ha, Domino Gloria! Don John of Austria is shouting to the ships. King Philip in his closet with the fleece about his neck, Don John of Austria is armed upon the deck. The walls are hung with velvet that is black and soft as sin, and little dwarfs creep out of it, and little dwarfs creep in. He holds a crystal phial that his colors like the moon. He touches and it tingles, and he trembles very soon. And his face is a fungus of leprous white and gray, like plants in the high houses that are shuttered from the day. And death is in the phial, and the end of noble work, but Don John of Austria has fired upon the Turk. Don John's hunting, and his hounds have bayed. Booms past Italy the rumor of his raid. Gun upon gun, ha-ha! Gun upon gun, hurrah! Don John of Austria has loosed the cannonade. The Pope was in his chapel before day or battle broke. Don John of Austria is hidden in the smoke. The hidden room in a man's house where God sits all the year, the secret window whence the world looks small and very dear. He sees as in a mirror on the monstrous twilight sea the crescent of his cruel ships, whose name is Mystery. They fling great shadows forwards, making cross and castle dark. They veil the plumed lions on the galley of St. Mark. And above the ship are palaces, brown black-bearded chiefs, and below the ships are prison where multitudinous griefs. Christian captives seek and sunless, all a laboring race repines, like a race in sunken cities, like a nation in the mines. They are lost like slaves that swat in the skies of morning hung, their stairways of the tallest gods, where tyranny was young. They are countless, voiceless, hopeless, as those fallen or fleeing on before the king's horses high in the granite of Babylon. And many a one grows witless in his quiet room in hell, where Yellowface looks inward through the lattice of his cell. And he finds his God forgotten, and he seeks no more a sign. But Don John of Austria has burst the battle line. Don John pounding from the slaughter-painted poop, purpling all the ocean like a bloody pirate sloop, scarlet running over the silvers and the golds, breaking up the hatches up and bursting up the holds, thronging of the thousands up that labor under sea, white for bliss and blind for sun and stunned for liberty. Vivat Hispania, Domino Gloria. Don John of Austria has set his people free. Cervantes, in his galley, sets the sword back in its sheath. Don John of Austria rides homeward with a wreath. And he sees across a weary land a strangling road in Spain, up which a lean and foolish knight forever rides in vain. And he smiles, but not as sultans smile, and settles back the blade. But Don John of Austria rides home from the crusade.
Okay. Wow.
So that's Lepanto, and I hope I didn't presume too much by reading the whole thing.
How could you stop?
Thanks. It's a brilliant piece of art, but it also tells a story that is it's incredibly relevant to our time. Like what you said, that the Sultan's smile is circling the whole world. You see that imagery at the very beginning, because we've been in dire straits before. This world has seen things that we thought we could never come back from. Yeah. It looked dire, and no one was responding to the call. Like the Pope is reaching up his arms in agony. Remember that image? The Pope is reaching up his arms in agony, and no one is coming. There's no one to face this, and they're just taking at these Christian cities one by one. And they're talking about how, hearkening back just a few centuries. When did you say Lepanto was?
1571.
1571. So this is a couple of centuries after the Crusade has ended, and so he's talking about Chesterton brings up Godfrey and Richard and the great crusaders that fought against the Moors in the time. I guess there wouldn't be the Moors, against the Byzantium, against go ahead.
Yeah, well, against the Muslims. That was always a favorite thing of both Christians and Muslims. They like to misnomer each other. Back in the Crusades, it was all the Christians were Franks and all of the Muslims were Arabs, or different names. But I just wanted to comment for just real quickly how G.K. Chesterton, he has this knack for taking very very elemental imagery and then just making it apply so well to the situation, which is actually it really has taught me a lot about how to write, because he'll take things that are abstract and then make them central to his story. That whole imagery of taking the crescent, he has it's so many different, combining so many different images and then making it apply perfectly and be central to what his whole point is right there.
And that is crucial to filmmaking. He does that so often. Like what you're talking about right now is there's the you keep on seeing that image that comes back of the crescent moon, that smiling image, like the Cheshire cat almost, and the crescent moon, and the sheath Skidamar. All of that keeps on recurring, and that's filmmaking, because each and every scene in a good movie, in a masterpiece, is linked together, either by the way it's edited together or by the imagery that goes beyond it or the music or all of it together. It's all linked together, and you see that with this great work right here, this little piece of masterpiece storytelling that we don't really know about. Like that, I don't I don't hear about Lepanto. This is a great story.
Yeah.
We have to tell the story of Lepanto.
Oh yeah, I mean I really doubt anyone really knows about Lepanto other than like maybe a handful here and there. But Chesterton here, he brings out all the big guns for this sharing this story here, which absolutely, yeah, we do need to tell this story.
Let's talk a little bit about the main characters here.
Well, of course, we got Don Juan,
Right.
which Chesterton calls Don John. It's always kind of bothered me. But he's from England,
It shows very clearly that Chesterton here is a Englishman. Like he is very anti. We can get to this later on with some of the other characters he talks about, but he is very anti a few characters that it's just because he's English that he's anti these characters. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so of course we got Don Juan of Austria, who is he is the illegitimate son of Charles V, who is one of the most powerful rulers in all of history.
And Charles V is a story all on his own, right there.
That's multiple movies.
Right.
That's a franchise. Are you listening, Disney?
No,
we got another franchise for you.
Yeah, that's a long form TV show right there.
Yeah.
Where you put it on Netflix. Because for folks who don't know, Charles V, he is the son of the Catholic king Ferdinand.
And Isabella.
Yeah. So he is far more powerful. Okay, this is such an interesting tale. Ferdinand and Isabel inherited a country that was pretty much on a brink of ruin. They didn't have much going on. It was completely all these warring little factions. There was Catalan. There was the Castile. There was Portugal. There was the Granadans that were controlled by the Moors. There was the Basques up in the north part of the country that didn't want to have anything to do with them, and that was Navarre, the country of Navarre. So it was a mess, and they, by all rights, should not have been in charge of anything, and yet. And also, they were never supposed to marry, too. Had you heard about the story there where Isabel was going to be forced to marry someone she didn't want to marry? I think it was Charles the Fat. And,
of Portugal, I think.
Yeah, I think it was. And Ferdinand rides through the night to get to her in time, and they marry, almost covertly. And so by the time they marry, it's like, okay, the church has spoken. You're married. You can't do anything about it. And from that union, they combined. So Ferdinand is in charge of the Catalan, which is on the the east side of Spain, and Isabel is the ruler of Castile, which is in the center. And the union of these two brings about a union of all of Spain, where they all become a part of this nationality. It's still a loose federation. It's not a nationality like that we think of it when we think of nationalism, but it's a loose federation of people that are dedicated to the idea of bringing Catholicism to the world, saving Catholicism. And they do save Catholicism. We do not have Our Lady of Guadalupe without the efforts of Ferdinand and Isabel, probably. I mean, God finds a way to work through all of us to unfold his plan. But they bring about Catholicism in the Americas. And while they're doing that, at the same time, they're sustaining Catholicism, which is falling more and more to heresy in Europe. And their son, Charles V, inherits not just Spain, but most of Europe through Ferdinand was a negotiator par excellence. If you ever want to learn about negotiation, think about Ferdinand. Or read about Ferdinand. But he negotiated all these other Catholic, through royal marriage, all these other Catholic countries to band under his son, Charles V. So when Ferdinand dies and Charles V takes over, he's not just in charge of Spain, but he's the Holy Roman Emperor in charge of most of Europe and all of the Americas now, which is the most powerful man in the world. Up to that point, the most powerful empire of all time. That's including the Roman Empire. And his son, Philip takes charge of that mantle. But his illegitimate son, Juan, Don Juan of Austria, is kind of left, as Chesterton says, in a room not really knowing what to do. till the Battle of Lepanto happened. So Philip, his brother, is in charge of this huge empire, and Don Juan, Philip is in charge of an empire that's crumbling, though, and Don Juan is suddenly tasked with finding a way to save it. Even though he's not in charge of it, he leads the forces against this superior Moorish navy, that if that navy marches and lands in Italy, or lands in the heart of Europe, which is what it was going to do, there's no army that can stop it. And it has a far superior navy than anything the Christians can throw at it. And this Don Juan, up to this point, has not been a great leader. And that's who we're stuck with.
Mm-hmm. But I love how he, like you were mentioning earlier, he brings up he calls back to the Crusades, because this is the time, 1571, the Crusades had pretty much drawn to a close. That crusading spirit that was so prevalent throughout the Middle Ages was really just fractured and disrupted by the Protestant Reformation and these different things going on. But he calls back to like Richard the Lionheart and Raymond and Godfrey, the original Crusaders who established the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Christian kingdom in the Holy Land. And so it evokes this imagery of Don Juan he is taking up the mantle of the Crusaders. Yeah. And he is taking, and through that he's bringing back the identity of Europe and of what they can be and they should be.
He's the last knight. The last knight is what he says, which is a very interesting. It's a very interesting, and Chesterton knows that he's doing this because that man that he speaks about at the end, Cervantes, he really was a part of that battle. The artist that we all know that went on to write Don Quixote was, and so there's a character within this story that you have to have Cervantes in this story, just like Chesterton is. The TV show that we need to make will have Cervantes, the almost the minstrel of this, the jester of the story. And the jester is the character that always is outside of time and place and is able to comment on what's happening. Cervantes takes this huge epic battle and creates a character that is the last. It's a fictional character that is the last knight of Europe. And in a way, I believe that Cervantes in Don Quixote is talking about Don Juan.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Okay, that's novel.
Yeah, well, the novel Don Quixote, think about it. He is a knight that is taking, and Chesterton probably, this is not my idea, this is Chesterton's idea. Chesterton says that Don Juan reaches off the wall and takes the sword from it. I'm misquoting it a little bit, but slightly, but it gives us that imagery of him taking the sword off the wall. That is something that all Spaniards had, because of that history we were talking about with Isabel and Ferdinand. They inherited a country that was in constant strife, that at any one moment could be raided by the Moors. They had been driven up into the mountains and so slowly had been coming down. But in Spain, the historian writes, I'll have to find out his name, but in Spain it is said that there was no Spaniard that did not have a spear by the wall and a sword over the fireplace. And they were always ready to take that sword down and fight for their lives. It was a warlike spirit, and the Spanish were the finest soldiers in the world at that time, because they had to fight for their survival on a daily basis. And so, but at that spirit was no longer needed. They had conquered, they had driven out, and they had made peace. So the swords were there on the wall getting rusty. But Don Quixote, in Cervantes' novel, he takes down his sword from the wall and says there are still battles that need to be fought. Don Juan is the same way, where he says, look, my brother Philip is going about trying to uphold this huge empire, but he's focused very much, and this is why Chesterton is so upset at him, he's focused very much on the heresies of England and Germany, because at this time, Germany had fallen to the, not all of Germany, but half of Germany had fallen to the Luther heresy. and the other half, and that would have been contained, but for the fact that England had now fallen to the heresy under
Henry VIII.
Henry VIII, exactly. So these two schismatics were rifting apart this Christendom, this idea of Christendom that existed, which was this idea of all these Catholic countries that were in it together. The idea of nationalism hadn't really come yet, because it was Christendom, and Christendom was splintering at this time, and Philip was focused on these two, the German and the English schismatics, and did not, and to, at least according to Chesterton, paid due attention to the fact that the Moors were going to march right up and take all of Christendom, split it right down the middle. And once it's split down the middle, then it's easy pickings on either side. So forget about Christendom, forget about the schismatics in Germany or England. And so here, all of a sudden, Don Juan has someone to fight. That is very similar to Don Quixote, where he says, oh, wait a minute, we have someone we need to fight. We need to go out and use the chivalric spirit that is dying from the world. We could do our own little talk about Don Quixote, but the spirit is the same, where you find something to take your warlike spirit against and fight for something that is greater than yourself, something that is beyond yourself. You're not punching in at a clock anymore. You have a responsibility to fight. And these two do. Don Juan does, and so does Don Quixote. I need to develop a little bit more what the link is, but do you see a little bit what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying there. And that idea of not punching in the clock, and finding that thing that is worth fighting for. I think that's important, taking it back to today. And that we cannot allow ourselves to just let all of this history and this culture and this heritage to be ran over and buried in under the ground, or disparaged and bashed. But I think, to me, also it's a very interesting question on what exactly it is, what it means to fight, and what it is to find something worth fighting for. Cervantes, he like you said, he fought in Lepanto. I looked it up. I knew he had a nickname, and I was trying to remember what it was. It was Manco de Lepanto, because I think that's the cripple of Lepanto, because he
lost his hand.
He got a injured hand for the rest of his life, crippled hand, fighting in Lepanto. So it wasn't any little scrape or anything. It was a lasting scar on him. So obviously he must have believed very, very much in what he was doing there. And it's just this great struggle, that so many people come together and are brought together, so many different characters and individuals. And so how does that apply today, and how do we see ourselves in that great struggle?
I can answer that by talking about how the struggle was resolved then. So Don Juan gathers this little ragtag group of boats that are terribly outmanned by the finest navy of the world had seen up to that time. The Turkish fleet was incredibly superior in every way to this little fleet, and that's what Chesterton writes, how up through Normandy that no one comes, that there was not enough boats that answer except for Don Juan and Cervantes and these few amount of little boats. So they go and they face this force that is incredibly superior to them, and Chesterton says Don John has unleashed the cannonade. They're fighting and they get the worst of it, but suddenly the winds change. And the wind change corresponds with the time that the Pope has organized the first Rosary Crusade ever, where he's gathered everyone of Rome, all the Catholics in Rome, which is the whole city, to pray for this little group of this little navy led by Don Juan, and the change of the wind allows the inferior fleet to outmaneuver, because the wind blows against the Turkish fleet, to outmaneuver and destroy almost the entire Turkish fleet, thereby ending their naval threat to invade Christendom. And they no longer could try and still march their armies up, but that was a much more difficult task. So it doesn't completely end it, but it doesn't completely end the Turkish threat, but it ends the threat of their navy. And there's much valor that's gone on before and after because in this story, and this is just a little part of the story, the Battle of Lepanto. But the tides change with prayer is the point. The tides change with prayer, and also a little bit of daring and a little bit of not being afraid to offend. Like, a sword in the face is very offensive. And sometimes people need swords in the faces. And I'm not saying that we go out and be violent, but we need to be bold and strong, fighting back and speaking out against that which we know is wrong. Mm-hmm. That which does not make sense. At least ask for people to explain their position. Mm-hmm. There's not enough explanation of positions at any point.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head right there in that I'm going to talk about a little bit about manliness.
Do it.
Because this is a very manly story, and I don't want to be misunderstood, because I think that these days when you talk about manliness, it's assumed that you're putting down womanliness, and that's not what we're doing. I think that it's time, like, we should be allowed, and it should be okay to talk about how there are manly virtues which are worth upholding and emulating. Mm-hmm. And I think that this poem really, really portrays Don Juan's manly virtue in that he takes up the sword and that he's willing to, like you said, to offend people with the sword. Mm-hmm. And of course, we're not advocating any kind of actual physical violence, but it's taking up but it's imagery that we can really relate to, that of taking up this responsibility, mm-hmm. and not shirking it off to someone else, and not being afraid of any kind of negative backlash that might scare us away from us. We are called to courage, and that is something I think is really inadvertently, oftentimes, but sometimes purposely, has been really broken down in our society. That idea of a good type of manliness. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I think that this story, Lepanto, and that poem by Chesterton is important for us to share with boys who are growing into men, because oftentimes today I think women really have all of these good images for them to look up to, lots of bad ones too, but they are constantly given like this affirmation that yes, you are strong, and I think that's a good thing. We should be telling these women that they can be strong and capable, but boys, I really think, are being cast aside, and they're not getting that strong imagery. You just look at any movies coming out today, and what strong male images are we getting for boys? So I think it's important, just as much as it is important for there to be strong women, there should be strong men, and and this, I know someone's going to be offended by me saying this, but I think it's true.
I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, because I'm not trying to disagree with what you're saying, but I'm trying to think, okay, what would someone say in response to that? Mm-hmm. Couldn't you say, well, men have had strong imagery for hundreds of years, like ever since we can remember, there's stories of strong men. It's the women's time to have strong female lead characters. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, I would disagree that there hasn't been strong images of women throughout the ages. We were just talking about Isabella la Católica. She was a very, very strong woman, and she it was her and Ferdinand together who ruled the kingdom. It wasn't just Ferdinand, it was Isabella, and she was the one, that commissioned Christopher Columbus to go out and sail, and that she was a driving force of so much of the kingdom.
She had more power than Ferdinand did. That was written into their marital contract. He took an inferior position.
So, and I would say I would very much disagree with that whole. I disagree with the premise is that of there not being strong woman images throughout the ages. And people oftentimes disparage Christianity as being anti-woman and putting down women through, the patriarchy and stuff like that. But Catholicism, so much of it revolves around the Virgin Mary,
And that's something that Chesterton talks about, where Christian that hateth Mary, hateth the Mother of God, killeth other Christian, and they say they hate Mary. That's something that's a very interesting thing about how Catholics, the veneration of Mary, it's set apart. It's set us apart in that we have, for 2 millennia now, revered a woman, as the model for all humans, the model, the human for all humans. There's the God-man, of course, but Mary is not God. She is this model for all of us, and she is a woman. But that is not that is not what we lead off with. And you don't see Mary out there slicing and dicing people, obviously. But she is yet the strongest human to have ever walked because she housed the Mother of God within her body. As she housed God within her body. She is the Mother of God, Theotokos. So she is the prototype for all strong women in any story, anywhere. She is the meta story, the meta woman. And yet, like you say, the church has given this idea that we put women down, that we put down the patriarchy. The patriarchy, through the church, puts women down. It's the furthest thing from the truth. It is anti-true. It is what I love how Peterson talks about that, where it's not just a lie, it is anti-true, that idea.
Yeah. And so, I think that would be the first thought I have there, that Western culture is not built on the idea of putting women down. I think Western culture, more than any other culture, lifts women up.
Yeah, that is a historical fact. I would dare anyone, anywhere, to come up with any type of data that is against that. There is not a written history anywhere that says that there is any culture that upholds women more than the church does. And I'm not bagging on any other cultures, but this is unusual. There is an unusual bit in this Western culture.
Yeah, and so if you're a listener or a viewer right now, that might come off as shocking to you, because I think that what we're being fed constantly from all sides and all directions today is that Western culture is deeply anti-woman through the patriarchy, and deeply racist, and deeply all these different things, when in reality, Western culture through Christianity has been more for women and for diversity and all these different things than any other culture in the history of the entire world. Not saying that Western culture is perfect, because it's not. Anything that's human is not going to be perfect, but it's been striving towards things that no other culture has ever striven more towards.
And I want to bring back what you were talking about earlier, about the Western story has a compelling story for men, and yet that is what is taken away by the modern tendency towards empowering female characters, because it's an attack specifically on what sets males up as, there's a part of this story for me. Right. And so at some point, what you were alluding to, what you were referring to earlier, speaking about how females are given all of the strong choices right now and men are not, that seems like maybe just misplaced, a misguided attempt perhaps to empower women. But I don't think so. I don't want to give that sort of benefit of the doubt, because it's a little more insidious than that. It is saying to women, it's not empowering women at all. It's saying to women, you will be strong if you are like the men of old. and men of old, you are bad. So at the same time, it's self-contradictory. We see with a lot of anti-truths, they're self-contradictory, but no one ever stops to analyze how they're self-contradictory. But think about it. If it's good for a woman to be like how men used to be, but it's bad for men to be like how women are portrayed now, and how they used to be portrayed, then how is it then that portraying women as men used to be is good? How is that? How is that? How there's a contradiction here, especially since there's a tenet of this faith, of this credo, is that there's no difference between men and women. In fact, men and women a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man, just by declaring it, by declaration.
And I think that that is another little reason for not being afraid of saying the wrong thing, or like of sticking up for what is true and good, because the rules as set up by these woke structures are so contradictory and so confusing that you're gonna end up offending someone inadvertently anyway.
Right.
So it's not like and when I say offending someone, obviously we're not talking about like you wake up in the morning, you're like, how can I offend someone today? That's not what we're talking about. Yep. What we're talking about is being brave enough and having the courage to stand up for what is true, even if it does offend someone. So the goal is not to offend someone, but the goal is to speak the truth. And if people find the truth offensive, then that's not your problem.
And to harken back to jump off that and say, it's not my problem if someone gets offended by this. A strong woman does not look like a strong man, nor does a strong woman act like a strong man. They complement each other, and the acts of strength from each sex complement their respective acts of strength. There's not a prototype. There's not a meta story or a meta woman like Mary that would act like a Don Juan of Austria or a Hercules. And the idea of these stories that create these meta warrior women and saying that is empowering are creating an incredible confusion for women themselves, thinking that we have to be that way, that you have to be that sort of kick-ass sort of woman in order to be a competent woman, period. So it's destructive to women. Now, it's destructive to men because men are told that anything you can do, I can do better. And that's a woman saying that. I don't understand how that phrase is so common and trite that you can just, it's almost like people laugh when they say it now. I guess it was supposed to be shocking when it first happened, but it should be shocking. It should be shocking because no, there are some things men can do better, and there are some things women can do better. In fact, there are some things that women can do that men cannot do at all. And no matter how much they declare that a man declares that he's a woman.
Yes. And that is just a reality, the differences that ultimately just cannot be denied. We can try to deny it as much as we want. We can scream and shout at the sun, but the sun's still going to be there, so we can't deny reality, and so I think that we're starting to collect little reasons for courage here, and that's another reason right there is that sooner or later reality is apparent, and so if you decide, I'm gonna be sticking up for the truth from day one, then for sure that you're on the right side, and that come what may, you at least have that confidence and that assurance.
I think as you were talking, I have there was some questions that were arising in my mind, like from the other side. Okay, so Peter, what is a strong woman? Or JP, what is a strong woman? Like you're saying that it's, for example, Wonder Woman is not a strong woman, according to your argument. So what is? Like Are they just, sitting at home knitting? What is a strong woman?
I mean, we already did bring up a couple of examples, like Isabella the Catholic. But I think that just like there are multiple different types of strong men, there are different types of strong women, and everybody is different. There's different personalities and different strengths. But I think when it comes down to is that there is a difference. I feel like this question is almost pointed at yourself. Did you want to? I feel like you have something.
You might be right. I didn't have something in my mind to say. I was just thinking, okay, I'm trying to pick apart what we're saying to speak about, to speak in response. Like, okay, how can I deconstruct what our argument is in as much as I can, so that in order to make it stronger. And yeah, a strong woman, I think, is a perfect example. Is Isabella. We need to be telling stories that have real strong women. That, like, for example, if someone that had the physique of a Black Widow punched someone in the face, that would not knock them out. That would probably not knock them off their feet, even if it was a strong man that they had. If it was a man of any weight and strength behind it, which most men do have some weight and strength behind them, and yet Isabella knocked many a man on his foot, off his feet, by her ability to move the world, move men in ways that had not happened before, like moving across oceans. That faith and that belief that Isabel had, hearkening back to Mary, that faith and belief that women have an ability to be strong in a way that men do not have an ability to be strong. And I'm not saying men do not have an ability to have faith, but women have an ability to do it in a way that empowers men to reach for something that they did not realize existed. I see that with my relationship with my wife. I'm empowered through my relationship with her to do more than what I thought was possible. And women have the ability to bring out of men more than what they imagined. And that is something that is incredible. So that is an example that I would like to bring up of a strong woman, is that which is able to bring life where there was not something that was not imagined before. And that's just one facet. That's just one example. We need to be telling a story about Isabel. We need to be telling a story about these strong women, because that is something that will speak to our story, to harken back to it. And someone like Don Juan will speak to our story that men do have a place in this world. There is darkness, and we have to fight against it. If we continue to feed men these weak characters, nihilism is the only response for a logical man at that point. Is, okay, well then nothing. If that's what the choice is, to be kind of carrying some purse somewhere, then I'll just play video games in my mom's basement.
Yeah, we're really getting, I think, like one of the reactions I have seen in my experience for men seeing that this negative portrayal of what manliness is, a rejection of that, but not really a healthy rejection. I think, especially like in college, the idea of like a manly man is basically like like a frat boy, who he doesn't respect women, and he is always up to trouble and doing like he has certain manly traits, like he is adventurous and he takes things into his own hands in the spirit of adventure and stuff like that, but for all the wrong purposes, in that he's basically just out for a good time, and that is like what you were saying, kind of a nihilism right there. And so this is why I think that what we have today, where we feel like we have to lift up women at the expense of men, is hurting. It really, really, really hurts like men, and it hurts boys especially, who they're just now growing up and coming into this world, and they probably don't know about this Western culture and this Western heritage. They don't have anything that they can look to and to realize, like you were saying, that the greater part of them, that the greatness within them. But aside from that, and aside from hurting males, it also hurts women, because it weakens men. And I think that both that men and women are very important to each other. And when you don't have true men in society, that women feel that, you know, because a smart, savvy, you know, strong woman is gonna, I don't think she's looking for a you know, pushover kind of guy, you know, and not that all women are looking for a man, but I think that in general, you know, men want to get, you know, if they want to get married, they're looking for a woman, and same thing for women, and women are looking for a man. They're not looking for what this world, what the society is raising right now.
Yeah, that's true. I have seen that exactly, and it speaks to the. And how do you know that that's true? Look at how everyone is single now. We've raised a generation, it seems like, of people that do not want the other half, because that's not what's fitting in a mate. So the fact that everyone is single speaks to exactly what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of, it's kind of random, but it just does remind me of Genesis, you know, when after God creates woman out of man, he says, at last, you know, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. So that's very ancient kind of language there. But I mean, I think what you could probably get from that is that at last he has an equal. There's no equal in the animal kingdom. Man is greater than, you know, the apes and the lions and things like that. But when he finds woman, he is someone who is equal to him. And that is not a cause for anger or frustration. That makes him extremely glad. You know, it's a relief. Now I have someone who is my equal, and now I am better because of it, just like you were saying.
Well, we're coming up on an hour. I think this is a good time to stop. Just to recap, we read the poem Lepanto by G.K. Chesterton and spoke how this gives us this is a little facet, one side in this diamond that is Western culture, one little facet of it that needs to be reflected out to a larger culture that's starving for stories like Don Juan of Austria, this hero that takes the sword off the wall and saves his people from what looked to be certain doom when no one else would go. That is a story worth telling, and it's a romantic tale that is full of twists and turns that you can't expect. I hope we get to make a TV show about it.
We have to, you know.